Welcome to the first video of 2 on how to set up push notifications for iOS and Android using Supabase and Flutterflow. In this first video, we're going to see how to set up notifications for Android. And then with the second video, we're going to continue with setting up notification icons as well as setting up notifications for iOS. Okay, so the first step is to connect a Firebase project. So I'm going to go over to Firebase and I'm going to create a new project. Let's call it Notify Me. I will deactivate the analytics for this project and we'll just wait for Google to create our project. Okay, so the Firebase project is created. Before we go back to Flutterflow, all we're going to do here is go to Settings, Project Settings, and make sure that Cloud Messaging is enabled. As well, we're going to go to User and Permissions. We're going to add a member and it will be Firebase at flutterflow.io and the role will be editor. Okay, we'll add this and that's done. At this point, we're going to switch to Flutterflow and we're going to connect our Firebase project. Okay, so now I'm in Flutterflow. I'm going to head to Settings. This is a brand new project. I've connected Supabase so far, otherwise nothing has been connected. So I'm going to go to Settings, Firebase, and here it requests our Firebase project ID. So I'm going to go back to Firebase. I'm going to go to General and copy this project ID, switch back to Flutterflow, paste it here, and then it's going to give me an error. That's usually because it adds a space, backspace here, and then connect. Okay, and now the Firebase project is connected. The next step is to generate the config files. So I'm going to click this button and generate the config files. All right, so the config files have been set. So we can go back to Firebase. If we go to General and refresh the page, if we scroll down, we should see our config files, and there they are. We have Android, iOS, and web set up. Now the next step, if we go back to our guide, will be to connect or create custom actions in Flutterflow to manage the token. So I'm going to scroll down to that step. We're going to create this first action. So I'm going to copy this. I'm going to head back to Flutterflow, custom code, and I'm going to create a custom action that I will name initialize Firebase. And I'm just going to select everything and paste the copied code. So in here, you can see that we have a few things to fill in from our config files. So here we have web, we have Android, and iOS. So to get these values, what we're going to do is download the config files that Flutterflow generated. So I'm going to go back to Firebase. I'm going to click on Android and I will download the Google services.json file. So I'm going to click on download. Okay, so I'll open this file with Notepad, and in here we'll find all the information that we need to complete our custom code in Flutterflow. So going back to Flutterflow, this section is for web, this section is for Android, and here we need API key, app ID, sender ID, which is actually the project number, project ID, and then storage bucket. So if I open up the Notepad file that we have, we can already start to copy and paste the information. So current key will be current key. So that's going to be this here. I'm going to copy and paste in here. And I'm going to do the same for all of the following items. Okay, so I've copied all of the information required for the project. So if I go back to Flutterflow, you can see all of the Android information is filled in. Now we need to do iOS and web. So I'm going to go back to Firebase, click on iOS, and same way we're going to download this. And from this document, we will open up, this one opened up in VS Code, but you can also open it up in the Notepad. And same way we did for Android, we have a bunch of items with their values. So we have API key with the value that follows, the sender ID with the value that follows, and we're going to do the same with this for the code. So if we go back to Flutterflow, I'm going to open up VS Code as a side panel here. So in the iOS section, we have API key, Google App ID, GCM sender ID. And if we look at the code, we have API key, GCM sender ID is here. We have Google App ID. So I'm going to go ahead and copy the following values here, the same way we did for Google. Okay, so the values have been copied in the custom code. You can see everything is filled in for iOS. Now we're left with web. So if we go back to Firebase and click on web, well, on web, you don't need to download anything. All the values are exposed here. So you can go ahead and copy that into the code. For this demonstration, it's not required because we're not going to use web. We're actually just going to use Android and iOS. So I'm going to go back to Flutterflow and save this action. And at this point, this initialize Firebase custom action is ready to use. Okay, so actually before we continue, there's one step required for the custom action that we just created, the initialize Firebase custom action. So if I go back to our guide and scroll up to the step that we were following. So in here, you will find Firebase messaging 5.0.0. So we're going to copy that, go back to Flutterflow. And for the initialize Firebase custom action, we're going to add a dependency and we're going to paste that in. And now we're ready to use this custom action. So actually, before we finish up with initialize Firebase, we're going to go down to main.dart. We're going to click on that. And under initial actions, we're going to add the initialize Firebase. So when the app starts up, it will connect our Firebase cloud messaging code right away. And the notifications will be ready to receive. So I'm going to go ahead and save that. And now we are done with step number 2. So going back to our guide, following step number 2, we're going to have to add a check notification status. This is for prompting users to authorize notifications on their phone. Before we prompt, we're going to check with this code to make sure that we've never asked the permission before. If we have asked for permissions to display notifications and the user has refused, then even if we prompt them again, it's not going to work. The users will need to go manually into settings and authorize notifications. So this little piece of code will help us determine if we can enable notifications from the app. If not, we're going to open up settings for the user with a different piece of code that we'll see after. So I'm going to copy this and I'm going to go to Flutterflow, create a custom action again. I'm going to paste this and I'm going to copy the title, change the action name, and I'm going to save. And I'll be prompted with this parameters in the settings don't match the parameters in the code editor. I'm going to go and click on yes. This will fix the return value and add it as a string. Like you can see here in the code, we're saying that we're going to return a string, and the string is either going to be authorized, denied, not determined, provisional, or unknown. So if we ever get denied, that means that the user has been prompted before to allow notifications and they've refused. If they did that, then we will need to use the following piece of code, which is open notification settings. So if the user has denied notifications and they want to re-enable them, we'll check first with the piece of code we just added. It will return denied because they've denied notifications in the past. And if that is the case, so if we get denied back, we're going to open their app settings on their phone so that they can toggle notifications back to on. So I'm going to go ahead and copy this. And to note here, we'll need to add the app settings import. We'll come back to do that. So I'm going to add a new action. I'm going to paste the code. I'm going to copy the function name or the action name, paste it here, and then I'll go back to the guide, select this app settings, go back to Flutterflow and add it as a dependency. At this point I can hit save and open notifications is ready to be used. Okay, so at this point, just so you can get situated here, we are completed with this step. We are done. The first step, we're now handling the initialization of cloud messaging and adding actions to handle FCM tokens. So I'm going to scroll down to step 2 again. We're going to scroll past this initialize Firebase action, the check notification status, and the open settings. These codes are completed. We've added them to Flutterflow. Now what we're going to do is add a piece of code that will listen for FCM token updates. So anytime the cloud messaging platform updates an FCM token, we want to get notified because we want to store that in Supabase. That's how we can deliver notifications to the correct user. So each user will be associated with an FCM token. When we want to notify them, we pass this token to cloud messaging and it'll notify the user. But sometimes these tokens get updated and we want to get notified when that happens. So we're going to copy this code here. And I'm going to go back to Flutterflow, add an action. I'm going to paste the code. I'm going to scroll back up and you can see it duplicated some of the code. So I'm going to select everything again and paste over it. Okay, so now everything is fine. All right, so at this point, we want to set up our deep linking scheme, which means that when we get a notification, then the notification will open in the app. So at the top here, I've added instructions on how to do this. So we're going to follow the instructions here. We're going to go to our Flutterflow settings. And what we want to find is this schema here, the scheme and the host. So usually it's the package name. So I'm going to save this action before we continue. I'm going to hit save. Oh, I forgot to change the name. I'm going to scroll down. This one is named, I believe it's handle or initialize FCM handling. Okay, so I'm going to go to settings, app detail, and here I will see my scheme and my host. So you can see my scheme is notify me, and then the host is notifyme.com. So going back to custom code, going to initialize FCM handling, I will change the first value here to my scheme. So notify me, and the host is notifyme.com. At this point I can save, and this will allow us to direct the users to the correct pages when we open notification. So at this point, we will go ahead and add this to the final actions of our main.dart file. So if we go back to Flutterflow, in the main.dart file, we initially added initialize Firebase. Now in the final actions, we will add our initialize FCM handling, and we will save. So if we take a quick look at this piece of code, what it does is it will first subscribe to FCM token changes, meaning it will listen for any modifications. And if there is a modification to the token, it will call on another function that we will create in just a moment. So if we go back to our guide here and scroll down below this massive function, you can see we have this function here, update user FCM. So this is going to be created inside of Supabase as well. So when a token is updated, our code that we just created, this one, will catch the update and it will call on this action, custom action code, which will go and update the token in Supabase. So with these two functions, or these two pieces of code, our FCM token should always be up to date in Supabase, and so we'll always be able to deliver notifications to the correct user. Okay, so we're almost done with the custom code. All we have to do is to add two more pieces of code. The first one is a cleanup, which will stop the action of listening that happens here. So when we initialize the app, this will start listening for FCM token updates. And when we disable notifications, let's say a user goes to settings and turns them off, then we want to stop listening to the updates until they turn it back on. So we're going to add this cleaned up FCM token code. So I'm going to go back to Flutterflow. I've already copied the code. I'm going to hit add action and I'm going to paste the code here. Oh, same deal. I'm going to select everything, paste, and the name is cleanup FCM, and I'm going to save the action. Now, I don't know if you noticed, but when I clicked the save action button, we saw those two lines appear, and these lines will actually cause errors sometimes, so you can remove them and hit save. So if we go back and check the other codes just to make sure that, oh, well, the same thing happened here. I'm going to delete them and save. Here is fine. Here is fine. Okay, so we've got our cleanup FCM token, and you can see it's importing our initialize FCM token or FCM handling token. This is because in this code here, we define a subscription stream, which this is what's listening to updates. So in our cleanup FCM code, we also import this stream so we can stop it if it started. Okay, so the last piece of code that we need is the update user FCM. This is actually a function that we'll create in Supabase that we can call on, and this will update our tables. So I'm going to copy this code, and I will go to Flutterflow, add a new action, paste it, select all, paste, and the code is called update user FCM. I'm going to copy this and name it like that. And you can see this is going to return a Boolean, so a true or false, and it requires an FCM token, meaning as soon as I hit save, it's going to give me an error. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. It says the parameters are not matching. We're going to go and hit yes so that it adds them automatically. And we're going to delete the two imports that just appeared randomly and hit save. And so at this point, we have all of the custom code that we need in Flutterflow for now. We're going to head to Supabase to create that RPC function, the one that will update the FCM token in our table. So now I'm in Supabase. You can see that I've already created two tables. The first one is named users, and it has a foreign relation to user UUID. So I'm going to go ahead and click on edit table so you can see. So we have created add that standard user UUID, and it's linked to our auth table. And then we have FCM token, which is text, and FCM last date timestamp TZ. So that's all you need to set up for the users table. More specifically, you need this FCM token in your table and this FCM last date. And for the second table, I've got a table named notifications that we're going to use later. And this notifications table has a title, a message, a route, parameters, and a link to the user UUID. So at this point, I'm going to go back to the guide in Notion. I'm going to click on copy for this code, and we're going to run this code in Supabase. That's going to create our function for us, the function that will update the token automatically. So I'm going to go back to Supabase. I will head to the SQL editor, and I will paste this new function. And so for this, what we're doing here is we're creating a remote function that can be called upon from Flutterflow. The name of the function is update user FCM, and this p_FCM value is passed as a parameter. So our Flutterflow code from earlier will call this function and pass the new FCM token, and this will update the FCM token for the authenticated user. So in your users table, you have to make sure that you have a user underscore UUID column. If you have an existing column linked to your user UUID, then you can just change the name here and it will work fine. So I'm going to go ahead and run this code. Okay, we get an error. Maybe if we do users.uuid. There you go. So for users.user_UUID, we're updating the FCM token and the last date. So I'm going to go back to the editor, confirm. Everything looks good. And now at this point, if we go to API documentations, so this icon here, we should see our new function that we can call from Flutterflow called update user FCM. And if I click on it, I can see that the arguments passed to this function is P_FCM, which is the new token. So now everything is set up. We can go back to our guide. And at this point, we should be able to send notifications to Android. So I'm going to set up a local test and we're going to try this out. Actually, before we start and test our code, there are two remaining things to do that I didn't mention. Obviously, you need to link Supabase with your Flutterflow project. So if I go back to Flutterflow in settings and Supabase, you can see I've got Supabase linked. I can update the schema. So we've got our two tables here that are showing up. And then the next thing is to enable notifications. So like I said earlier, we want to have a switch that toggles on and off notifications. So in our case, what we're going to do first is check for permissions. So we're going to use our check for notifications. I can't remember what it's called. Yeah, check notifications status code. We're going to first check this. That's going to return a value. If the value returned is denied, then we will use our open notification settings code, which will open the settings for the phone. And the users will then be able to manually toggle on notifications. If we don't get denied, then we'll use Flutterflow's built-in notification permission request to request permission for notifications. And that will be it. So I'm going to go to Flutterflow and we're going to build that logic before testing. Okay, so going to Flutterflow now, we have this simple UI. We have 2 pages in our project. We have login, which will allow us to create an account. And then the home page, this switch will just toggle on notifications and toggle off. So let's call this switch notifications. And we're going to head to the actions. I'm going to open up the action flow editor, and on toggle on, what we want to do first is check for notification status. I'm going to head to custom actions and I'm going to check notification status. I'm going to give this action an output value. So let's call it status. And then we'll check that status is not denied. So the condition will be a single condition. The first value will be the output of our first action, which is we named status. And we want not equal to denied. So if the status is not equal to denied, meaning the user has never denied push notifications, then we will request push notifications. So I'm going to add it in action. We're going to go with permission, request permission. And you can see here we have no option. I'm clicking on this, there's no option. So I'm going to close this up. I'm going to head to settings. And we're going to go to permissions. I'm going to toggle on notifications. So this will allow us to request for notifications permission. I'm going to go back to our project, switch notifications, open up the action editor. So we were here, request permission. Now we can select notifications. And then we'll have another conditional check. We're going to check that we have notification permission. So I'm going to type that in, notifications. And we will see here, we have a Boolean for notification. So we're going to ask for permission, and then we check if we have it. Then we will initialize FCM handling. Now, you might be thinking, well, if we go back to our custom code, if we go to main.dart, we have it here. So our app boots up, it goes through initialize Firebase, and then right before we see our screen, it goes to initialize FCM handling. That's true. So this code, initialize FCM handling, will run once, but if permissions are denied, it will actually do nothing. It won't execute all the code. So going back to our project, going back to this switch to the action editor. So if no permissions are allowed yet, and we run the app, this code, initialize FCM handling in the app startup, will do nothing. So the first time we actually enable notifications, we need to run this code. So we will add it to our branch when enabling notifications. So now this branch here goes, checks for status, never been denied. So most likely never been asked or has been approved before. Then it requests for permission. If the permission is already granted, it will go straight to initialize FCM handling, and this will fetch a token and store it to Supabase. Now, what happens if we go to here and we hit denied? So if we hit denied, it means we've previously asked for permissions and the user denied. So when that happens, we can't go again and use this action because it will do nothing. It won't prompt the user again and again. So in order to change that, the user needs to manually open up settings and re-enable notifications for our app. So to make things easy, we will add this action called open notification settings. So this will bring the user to their settings, okay? And from there, they'll be able to toggle on notifications. Okay, so our flow is almost ready. One thing that we need to do in Flutterflow is make sure that the switch shows the correct value. So if I go back to Flutterflow, to our notification switch, you can see here that we're going to open the settings, but this flow will happen when the user toggles on a switch. And when they toggle it on and it goes here, notifications are not actually enabled because we don't know the result of this action. They could go to settings and not enable or not allow push notifications. So what we want to do here is set the switch value. So set the form field switch notifications to false. So when the user will click on this, if they've denied push notifications in the past, it will open up their phone settings, present them with the screen to update their selection, and it toggles the switch off. So when they come back from settings, they'll land on this page again, and the switch will be off, and they'll be able to, if they selected to allow notifications, they'll be able to toggle it on for a second time. And by doing so, the flow should follow the left branch here and initialize our FCM handling. So I'm just going to clear this message by entering something here. Okay, the message should go away. And now what I'm going to do is add the last action on switch notifications when the user toggles off. When user toggles off, we just want to do clean up FCM. This will stop listening for updates, and then we're all set. So now I'm going to go ahead and create a local run. And what we're going to do is create a user. And from that, we're going to test our push notifications. Okay, so our app is finally running. We're just going to log in, which will create a user, and then we'll toggle on notifications. I'm going to go to Supabase first and show you that we don't have any users in here. I will check in the auth table to make sure that we don't have any users either. Okay, our auth table is clear. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and create an account. So I'm going to click on sign up. I've already entered the information, and I'm going to hit create account. Okay, so we're in. This switch by default is on. I believe that's in a setting that we forgot. So if I go to this switch and check the initial value, yeah, we've got initial value of on. So what we're going to do is toggle it on and off, or off and on. So I'm going to turn it off. And before I turn it on, because I don't have set up in Supabase to duplicate my users from the auth table to the public table, I will go do that manually. So if we're in Supabase and let's just refresh the auth table and go to users, we have our user with our generic email. So I'm going to go to my public table, users. And normally I would have a function that triggers automatically when a user is created in the auth table. They're added here. So now I don't have this function in this new project, so I'm going to do it manually. I'm going to select a record. There it is, and save. So now we have our user in the user table. So when we toggle on the switch, it should populate this FCM token and FCM last date switch. So let's do that now. We're going to toggle it on. Okay, and you can see it went to settings right away. It's opening up settings because I guess in this test version, by default, they're disabled. So I'm going to toggle it on. So you right away, you saw the branch for the denied response. So if I go to notifications, actions, and on toggle on, we did this. We checked for notification status. It was denied. So normally it's just not set. On an actual phone, it's not set. But now in this test version, I guess it's denied by default. So it went down this route. It opened up the settings, and it should have set the field of our switch to false. So we're going to go back to our app. Oh, there it is. So I'm going to click on that back arrow, and now we're going to toggle on the switch. And now because we've enabled notifications in the settings, it should go to the left branch and populate this. So I'm going to hit refresh. And there it is. We have our FCM token and the update timestamp. Now, to test notifications, what we can do without setting a whole trigger and notification function, we can copy this FCM token and go to our Firebase project. So I copied it. I'm going to go to Firebase. In Firebase, we will find the messaging tab. If you don't see it, you can go to run, I believe, and there it is, messaging, and then we'll create our first campaign. And for our example here, we're going to go with notification messages, create, and we're going to enter a title as well as a notification test. So test notification. Hey, this works. Okay, so we can see what this is going to look like. There's no image or no icon is going to use our app icon, and we're going to hit the send text test message. In here, I'm going to paste the FCM token, add it, and now when I click test, it should send a notification to our app. So I'm just going to go like this, and in this app, I'm going to close the app. Okay, because when the app is open and running, notifications won't get delivered as pop-up notifications from the top bar. This is kind of slow. Anyways, okay, so I'm gonna hit test, and it should deliver to our phone here. And you can see we got our Flutter icon there. I'm gonna open up the notifications, and we got our actual notification. So if I click on it, it should open up. There's no path or route set, so it's not gonna take us to any specific page. It's just gonna open up the app. So if I click on it, there it is. So that's how you set up notifications for Android. Now, once you go to production, the icon that shows up at the top will be pretty ugly unless you set it up yourself. So unless you go and do some extra steps, the icon won't actually be your app icon. So I'm going to show you that in the next video, as well as how to set up notifications for iOS, which requires a few extra steps. So thanks for watching, and if you're interested in learning how to set up the icon and iOS notifications, please watch my next video.